Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Slowing Down with the Scriptures. I'm Chris Matley. Thanks for joining me. Today is kind of a companion piece to last week's episode where we deconstructed a psalm. We're going to do that again this morning. This is Psalms chapter 63. And we're going to take a look at this psalm. It's actually very short. Same as last week. It's 11 verses in the English translation. We're going to take a look at this psalm and allow it to speak to us from the point of view that it was written. And we're going to allow it to change us from the inside out as we read it. So this is Psalms chapter 63. This was written by David, inspired by a particular experience that he went through where he was on the run from Saul, the king that was trying to murder him. And fearing for his life, he fled out into the desert. And then he went into this, he hid himself in the En-Gedi wilderness. So this is a location in Israel where there's a cut in the hillside called a wadi. And this wadi has a system of caves climbing up this, the side of this hill. And it overlooks the Dead Sea, in fact. When you get to the top, you can look out and you can see the valley of the Dead Sea. I've actually been to this place that David was in. I don't mean figuratively, like emotionally I was there. I mean that I went there physically to this place in Israel. I went there with my dad on a trip in 2019 and visited this location. And it's very bleak, very desolate, almost depressing. It looks like a place that you would go to die. Except that at the very top of this wadi there's a natural spring, and it's beautiful, and clear, fresh water just pours up out of the ground and then cascades in a little stream all the way down, creating explosions of greenery in the middle of this desert. So this is the place that David was hiding when he either wrote this psalm or was later inspired to write this psalm about this experience. So this is how David begins. He says, "O God, you are my God. Early I will seek you. My soul thirsts for you." Already there's a bunch for us to kind of unpack there. That phrase that he begins with, Eli Elohim, "O God, you are my God," is an acknowledgement fundamentally of who he is talking to and why. God, you are my God. There are no other gods. I disavow myself of other points of worship, and I reclaim you as my God. Right there in the opening phrase. And then he says, "Early I will seek you." Now, this could mean early in the morning. It's early in the morning right now for me as I'm doing this. And that is a good time to seek God. It's good to set aside or consecrate a time just for him. It could mean early on in a set of circumstances. In other words, I'm not going to wait till the end of this series of unfortunate events to seek you. I'm going to seek you at the beginning. So I'm not just seeking you in retrospect, looking back. I'm going to seek you at the beginning of something. It could mean that. Other translations of this say, "Earnestly will I seek you." That just means with a concerted effort. It could mean all of these things. But that's what relationship is, really, is to set aside time, to demonstrate sacrifice in order to show preferential treatment for this person in the moment, right? And then he says, "My soul thirsts for you." This is a very visceral expression of a desire to commune with a living God. And he connects it to his physical body. He may have been very thirsty, lying in one of these dusty, dry caves, waiting to find out if he was going to be killed or not. And he draws a parallel between that experience and the experience of desiring the presence of God. So then he goes on to say, "My flesh longs for you in a dry and thirsty land where there is no water." So I have looked for you in the sanctuary to see your power and your glory. This is a very understandable sentiment to want to see God's power and his glory. If God is real and he is who he says he is, then wouldn't it be nice to have confirmation of that by seeing his power and his glory, his revelation? In fact, we do see his power working in people's lives all the time. It may not look like handwriting in the sky, but we see people that are followers of Jesus being changed from the inside out, being transformed into different people. But here David says, I've looked for you in the sanctuary. That word sanctuary, when translated in other places in the Old Testament, often gets translated as the phrase holy place. Like in Exodus, where it describes the place where God's glory resides in the middle of his people. And as New Testament Christians, we know that God's glory no longer resides in a particular place. Thank God for that right now, right? If God's glory was in a building, we'd all be missing it. But in fact, God's glory has come to reside in the community of his people. So when we become connected together, you might say when 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am in the midst of them. God's glory now resides in the gathering of his people. He goes on to say, because your loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise you. Thus I will bless you while I live. I will lift up my hands in your name. My soul shall be satisfied with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise you with joyful lips. That term marrow and fatness is kind of foreign to our modern ears. It's kind of gross, actually. But it's terminology to describe excess or opulence. Like, for example, if you sat down at a feasting table and you were hungry and you surveyed that table and you saw that there was just a huge array of delicious foods. You had savory food and sweet things and sour things, and you had fruits and vegetables and meats and all kinds of things. And you partook of all these different flavors, and at the end you were satisfied in your body. He's using that imagery to draw a line between what happens when he connects with God in his soul. So my soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, as if I've eaten a delicious meal. And my mouth shall praise you with joyful lips. This is really important as we put his praise on our lips. Something I pray all the time with my family, with my children, is thank you, God, for all you're doing in our lives. I say that almost every morning with them. Thank you, God, for all you're doing in our lives. Because I'm putting his praise on my lips. I'm thanking him for what he's doing in our lives. And as we do that, as we transform into a grateful people, joy begins to bubble up inside of us. And this joy tends to dissolve things like bitterness and unforgiveness, those more corrosive emotions. And he goes on to say, when I remember you in my bed, I meditate on you in the night watches. That's a beautiful image of a person who is consumed by the seeking of God, so much so that even when laying in bed at night and looking up into the dark, your mind drifts to the God that made you. That word meditate there is a Hebrew word, echegeh, is how it's pronounced, I believe. And it's found one other place in the Bible. It's found in Isaiah. Isaiah uses it to describe the sound a dove makes, actually. The cooing or mewling of a dove. And so this shows us that this word meditate is not just a passive reflection or consideration, but an active engagement. It kind of conjures up this image of a person making a repetitive sound with their mouth, or maybe singing a little song, engaging as they consider the greatness of God. He goes on to say, because you have been my help, therefore in the shadow of your wings I will rejoice. My soul follows close behind you. David's acknowledging here that when we find ourselves in tricky circumstances in life, that rather than try to do it on our own or do it on our own strength, it would be much better to posture ourselves as if we are following after God. He says, my soul, my nephesh, my whole being follows close behind you. This is both a declaration of faith and a faithful declaration. He's saying, I'm going to follow you, God. I'm going to follow you all the way up and out of this wadi and into a better set of circumstance. But I like that image of, therefore, in the shadow of your wings I will rejoice. In this system of caves that we visited, one side or the other is always in shadow because it's so deeply cut into the hillside. And there's a safety David must have felt as he remained in this shadow, and he conjures that image here. He goes on to say, your right hand upholds me, but those who seek my life to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. They shall fall by the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. Everyone who swears by him shall glory, but the mouth of those who speak lies will be stopped. What David is pining for here is justice, a sense of justice here on earth. I think there's a tendency for us as Christians to look forward almost exclusively and think of this life as just something we just have to endure. We just have to get through this until we get to the other side where everything will be good. But that diminishes the purpose that God has placed on us. It diminishes the reality that this is not just a practice for the real thing. This is the real thing, right here, right now. And David's desire to see justice was not one of not a figurative, well, someday there'll be justice on the other side of this life. He's invoking God's justice here on this planet. The reality is that while it may be true that we'll never see perfect justice in our world in this life, we can see a change, a move towards God's justice and health in our own selves as we begin to purge ourselves of the injustice that lingers in our heart and then allow that to affect the people around us. Think of how that could spread across this planet if we were all doing that. Well, thanks for joining me this morning. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Psalms chapter 63. Lord bless your day, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.